Shalom, everyone. I'm Josiah Geoffrey.
I'm Hosea Geoffrey.
And we're back discussing the Torah portions. This week we're looking at the portion of Ha'azinu, which goes from Deuteronomy 32, verse 1 through verse 52. We've already read the portion ahead of time, so if you'd like to read it as well, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then we'll go ahead and get into discussing.
In Ha'azinu, Moses teaches a song to the people of Israel to remind them of God's blessings when they follow him and the punishments that await them when they disobey, as well as the judgment that God will give to destroy Israel's enemies and cleanse his people.
So this portion begins with Moses launching straight into the song of Moses that he's teaching to the people of Israel. That's basically what most of this portion is going to be, is Moses reciting the song to the people so that they can learn it for themselves. We had read in the previous portion that God had told Moses to give this song to the people of Israel as a witness against them when eventually the people stray from God's ways and go into sin. And so as Moses begins the words of this song, he actually first starts out just by praising God and saying, I call on heaven and earth and all of creation basically to hear my words because I'm proclaiming the name of Adonai, the God of Israel.
This concept of Moses calling on heaven and earth to hear his words is actually something he's talked about multiple times in the book of Deuteronomy in the context of calling on heaven and earth to witness what Moses is saying and to be a witness against the people of Israel when they don't listen to what Moses is saying. And this is really interesting because the people of Israel are going to have generations go by before the words of this song will all come to fruition. As Moses said, he's writing this to be a witness against them for when they forsake God, but actually the generation that he's saying this to doesn't forsake God. They were the ones who heard the words of Moses directly, and they remain faithful to that all their days. But the time scale for which this song was intended to be a witness to the people of Israel lasts over the course of many generations. It's intended to live unforgotten in the mouths of Israel's offspring, so that after many generations of forgetting God and turning away from him, this song will bring a future generation of Israel back to God and bring about the restoration of his people. And so, since it's taking such a long time scale, no one who Moses actually said this to is going to be around, except the heaven and earth themselves. So by calling on the heaven and earth to witness what Moses is saying, he's putting that out there such that a future generation who never met Moses, never met the people Moses spoke to, nonetheless has a witness that heaven and earth were there when Moses said these things thousands of years ago, and the words are still there for all of us to hear today.
And so this just shows the unchanging nature of what Moses is saying. There are other places in Scripture, like in Jeremiah, where God likens his faithfulness to the people of Israel to his faithfulness to day and night, and also to the unmeasurableness of the heavens above or the foundations of the earth below. So God is using the heaven and earth, and he's using all of creation to show as long as this universe stands, so also will my word stand, and so also will my faithfulness stand.
And Yeshua said, until heaven and earth pass away, not one yud or one stroke will pass away from the Torah. So Yeshua is saying that the very heaven and earth that witness to these words, as long as they're still around, these words stand. That's exactly what it means to call on heaven and earth to witness to these words.
And so after Moses gives the introduction to this song, just praising God for his faithfulness and goodness, Moses then moves on to talk about how the people of Israel rebelled against their good and faithful and steadfast God. Moses had just finished describing God as a solid rock who is just and faithful. But then here Moses says that they, meaning Israel, acted corruptly against Adonai, their God. And he says, they have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, but are a perverse and crooked generation. Do they thus repay Adonai, O foolish and unwise people? Is not he your father who has bought you? He has made you and established you. So what's interesting here is that Moses, in the first verse here, he says they are not his children. They are not his sons because of their rebellion and because they're acting foolishly and perversely. They're a crooked generation, and Moses says they are not God's sons. And then in the very next verse, he says, is he not your father? So it's like they're not his sons, and yet he's saying God is their father. This is made even more interesting when we go back a little bit in the book of Deuteronomy and we read in Deuteronomy 14:1, You are the sons of Adonai your God, for you are a holy people to Adonai your God. So this again shows the dichotomy that we've talked about a lot in the book of Deuteronomy, which is that the people of Israel are God's people and need to be God's people. The people of Israel are God's sons and they need to be God's sons. The people of Israel are Israel and they need to be Israel. I'm reminded of an exchange that Yeshua had with his Jewish listeners in John chapter 8. Basically, Yeshua was teaching them and telling them that they were slaves to their own sin, and they needed to be set free from that sin by following him. And the Jews were saying, we're sons of Abraham, we aren't anybody's slaves, we don't need to be set free. And so Yeshua and the Jews start going back and forth until it gets to the point that the crowd wants to kill Yeshua. And so at this point, Yeshua says to them, but now you look to kill me. You do the acts of your father. Then they said to him, we have one Father, God. Yeshua said to them, if God were your father, you would have been loving me, for I came forth from God. Why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to hear my word. You are of the father, the accuser, and you want to do the lusts of your father. He who is of God hears the sayings of God. Because of this, you do not hear, because you are not of God. So Yeshua is paralleling the concept that Moses was talking about, where yes, God is their father, but at the same time, they aren't of God, and God isn't their father because they aren't listening to God's words and doing what God says and being godly people. The Jewish crowd that Yeshua was talking to was trying to assert their own ethnicity as a means of asserting their own standing before God merely because of their lineage. But Yeshua is saying, no, that's not what counts. What counts is your actions. And so if you are acting like a son of God, then you are a son of God. But if you're acting like a son of the accuser, of the devil, then you're a son of the devil. That applies to everyone, Jew and Gentile alike. If you are not following in the ways of God, then you are not a son of God. So both what Yeshua says in John and also what Moses is saying here in the Song of Moses, and also what we read about how Israel needs to circumcise their hearts, all of this is pointing to the fact that the Jewish people have a special calling in God, but that also comes with the responsibility for the Jewish people to live up to that calling, to live up to the calling of being God's children, of being circumcised, of being God's people.
In the same way, we as followers of Messiah have all been adopted as sons and have been called children of God. And yet, like the people of Israel, we are children of God, but we need to be children of God. Paul says some things which parallel what Moses said here when he says, do all things without murmurings and reasonings, so that you may become blameless and innocent children of God, unblemished in the middle of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you are shown to be as lights in the world, holding out the word of life. So Moses was saying that they were not his children, but instead were a crooked and perverse generation. Because of the way that they were acting toward God, they were making themselves blemished. They had a defect in that they were coming toward God with this corruptness and evil in the way that they were behaving. They weren't acting like children of God, and because of that defect, they couldn't be counted as his children. So Paul is calling on us to not act that way, but instead to be unblemished. Unlike the people of Israel who had a habit of grumbling against God and resisting his will, we need to do everything without our own reasonings or without murmuring against God. We just need to trust in him and do what he says, and then we will be unblemished and we will be children of God, even in the middle of a crooked and perverse generation. Moses says that dealing corruptly against God makes us a crooked and perverse generation. But Paul is saying in the middle of a world that is blemished and defective and dealing corruptly against God, we need to be pure, unblemished, innocent, and that makes us lights in the world. And this is especially true for the Jewish people. As we've talked about a lot of times, it's Israel's special job to be a light to all the nations. And so this concept of being a light in the world is even more true of a Jew who fulfills his purpose and is a child of God when he's acting blameless and innocent by trusting in God, not grumbling against him, and doing what he says.
So after Moses talks here about how the people of Israel aren't being God's sons, Moses then exhorts the people of Israel to remember what God did for them in the generations of times past. So Moses talks about how God set the different borders for the different nations all around the world, including setting the borders for the land of Israel. He established the people of Israel and gave them a portion, gave them an inheritance in the land of Canaan. This is a concept that we've talked about multiple times before, including how God gave specific inheritances to each of the different 12 tribes of Israel, except for the tribe of Levi, which it says that he gave them God himself as their inheritance. But what's really interesting is that Moses says here, for Adonai's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. So Moses is saying that like how God gave an inheritance and a portion to all the different peoples and to the people of Israel, he's saying that the people of Israel itself is God's portion and God's inheritance on the earth.
We've seen this concept of Israel being God's heritage over and over and over again. God chose Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their offspring to be his people, and he redeemed them out of Egypt. And that's what it means to redeem them, is to take them for yourself, to purchase them out. And so by delivering the people of Israel from Egypt, God took Jacob for himself. And so that's his nation, that's his portion. They belong to him. Naturally, that affects the way he treats them and considers them, as we're going to see more a little later on. From here, the song starts to cover Israel's history, how God has provided for them, and the people of Israel ended up rejecting God's provision despite how much he gave them. Basically, he starts with God finding them in the wilderness and taking care of them and providing for them there. And he says that God kept Israel as the apple of his eye. Adonai alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field. So this is recounting God bringing Israel into the wilderness, and from the wilderness into the promised land. God was guiding them that whole way in the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, day and night, constantly leading them and providing them with food and bringing them into that land which was exceedingly fruitful so that they could eat the best of everything. And so Moses makes a special point to note that Adonai did this alone. There was no other God with the people of Israel through this entire time. And so this just shows to the people of Israel, this song witnessing to them, that God is their God and he is their only God. He is the sole reason that they have existence. And
Adonai our God, Adonai is one.
Exactly. No other God has any part to play in who Israel is and who they need to be. And yet Moses then says that when Israel grew fat, then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred Adonai to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. So despite God alone giving Israel their existence and bringing them into that land and giving them the best of everything, the people of Israel forsook God. They didn't trust in the rock of their salvation. Even though God had been so solid, a solid foundation to the people of Israel in giving them everything they need and sustaining who they are, they chose instead to go after other gods, or rather things that weren't gods at all. Things that they had never known, their fathers had never known, that were new, just made up out of nowhere. Rather than trusting in the rock who made everything, on which everything is built, they made things up out of thin air. And so by doing all these things, by forsaking and forgetting the God who gave Israel birth, who gave them existence, they provoked God to jealousy, they made him angry. And so it's at that point that the song says that Adonai saw what they did and he starts to punish them and retaliate. He says, Adonai saw it and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. So the face value of what God is saying here is something that Moses actually talked about a few portions ago when he was listing the curses. That because people of Israel don't follow God, he's going to punish them, he's going to turn away from them and exile them, scatter them among foreign nations. The Hebrew word that's translated as nation here is actually goy, which is also used to refer to Gentiles, foreigners who are not Jewish people from all the nations of the world. Basically, God is saying that since Israel was not following their God, but instead was following foreign gods and so provoking God to jealousy, he is going to use foreign peoples to provoke his people to jealousy and enrage them. So basically, this song is foretelling that when Israel forsakes God, God is going to send foreign nations who have no knowledge of God to judge Israel. And that should enrage and provoke them and cause them to seek God when they see these foreign nations afflicting them and oppressing them and having power over them. Because God is giving them power over his own people, Israel. If Israel decides they want to serve other gods, God will make sure that they are serving other peoples. And it's going to be disastrous for Israel. It's going to come with arrows and sword and calamity, and Israel is going to be defeated.
And there's another layer to this here when God is saying that he's going to make Israel jealous by that which is not a people. God is basically saying that in the same way that the people of Israel, instead of just serving their one God, Adonai, they went and served other gods. God is saying that in the same way, even though Israel is his people, he's going to bring in Gentiles to be his people. So in the same way that Israel's making God jealous, God is going to make Israel jealous. And he's going to use the nations, the goyim, the Gentiles, to accomplish that. Paul talks about this explicitly in the book of Romans when he says, "But I say, did Israel not understand? First, Moshe says, I will provoke you to jealousy by that which is not a people, by an uncomprehending goy I will anger you." And Yeshayahu, Isaiah, is very bold and says, "I was found by those not looking for me and became seen to those not asking about me." I say this then, did they, Israel, stumble so that they might fall? Let it not be. But by their misstep, the salvation is come to the goyim, the Gentiles, to arouse Israel to jealousy. For I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be wise in your own conceits. That hardness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the goyim comes in, and so all Israel will be saved. So Paul makes clear what Moses is indicating here, which is that basically the people of Israel reject God and turn from his ways. And so because of that, that opens the door where God's salvation goes out to the Gentiles and they can be brought in and become God's people. In Acts, it says that God took a people for himself from among the goyim. And so by God doing this, by God bringing an uncomprehending goy into the family of God and making them his people, that will eventually arouse the people of Israel to jealousy. And so by Gentile believers in Yeshua knowing the Jewish Messiah and knowing the God of Israel better than Jewish people themselves do, that will provoke the Jewish people to jealousy and cause them to return to God. And through the fullness of the Gentiles, that is the means by which the people of Israel one day will all be saved.
But at this point, God adds that even when he's sending all these terrible judgments against Israel and sending foreign nations to harass and attack Israel, he's not going to completely destroy them. He's going to spare some of them. As we already read, Israel is God's portion and his heritage, and so he's not going to give up on them that easily. Rather, since they are his heritage, his name and reputation is tied to them in such a way that he can't abandon them, he can't destroy them. As he says, I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory. Had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not Adonai who did all this. So yes, Israel is provoking God to wrath and to anger and to jealousy, and they're doing it to such an extent that he would have completely destroyed them had he not tied his name to them. God has a specific purpose for Israel, which involves making his name great through them, glorifying himself and sending out his light to all the nations through them. And so if they were destroyed, then his enemies would say, we won. His enemies would defame God and say, we're the powerful ones. Israel and their God are nothing. And of course, God can't stand for that. He is the only God. His name needs to be great, and he will prove that through his people Israel. Because these nations around Israel, even though God is using them to provoke Israel, they nonetheless don't know who he is. And he says, if they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. How could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them and Adonai had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock. Our enemies are by themselves. So basically, as long as God is provoking Israel by these foreign nations who don't know him, the nations themselves will continue not to know him because Israel is not doing their job, they're following other gods, and God is not being glorified. Instead, they have no understanding, and even as God is giving them victory, they don't get that the reason they have victory is because God is allowing his people to be defeated. Unless God had given up the people of Israel to be defeated, there is no way that these nations would be able to defeat Israel. And yet, since those peoples don't understand this, they won't trust in God. They will continue to rely on their own rocks, which are foreign gods who are not even gods. There is only one true God, one true rock that anyone can stand on and be secure and live. And so, Moses is saying that these peoples aren't going to trust in God. They aren't going to trust in the rock, and they are going to be left alone. And that is when God is going to begin to glorify his name through Israel.
And so it's at this point that God says that he's going to take vengeance on all of Israel's enemies, and he's going to redeem his people and come and rescue them. God declares, vengeance is mine and retribution. In due time, their foot, the foot of Israel's enemies, will slip, for the day of their calamity is near. Adonai will vindicate his people and will have compassion on his servants when he sees that their strength is gone and there is none remaining, bond or free. And he will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they sought refuge? See now that I am he, and there is no God besides me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand. So at this point, God is revealing himself both to Israel and to their enemies. God is saying that he is the one who takes vengeance, and he is the one who gives life and heals. He is going to have compassion on his people, on the people of Israel, and he is going to rescue them. And he's basically saying both to Israel and to their enemies, where are all of your false gods? What can they do? They aren't going to be able to help you. Only I can help you. And so God is saying, I am going to help my people Israel. I'm going to save them and give them life and heal the wounds that I inflicted on them. But on the other hand, for Israel's enemies who aren't putting their trust in God, God is going to completely obliterate them in his vengeance.
I want to specifically talk about this concept of God saying, vengeance is mine, especially in light of something that Paul says in Romans. If possible, so far as it is in you, be living in peace with all men, not avenging yourselves, loved ones, but give place to the wrath of God. For it has been written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says Adonai. So what Paul is saying is that since God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, it's his job to do the avenging, so we shouldn't. We should be living in peace with all men as much as we can. We shouldn't seek to avenge ourselves, but instead let God do the avenging for us. And this definitely goes in line with what Moses is saying in this song, because the whole theme that keeps coming up is God is the rock. God is the one that everyone needs to trust, but no one is trusting in. Everyone's turning to other gods or to their own might and forsaking the one rock who gives salvation. And yet God is saying when he gives vengeance, that is his way of proving his power, proving that he is the only God, he is the rock. Anyone can trust in him, and he will save his people. And so if we are being his people and being his children, we can trust in him to take vengeance for us. That is his job. He has claimed it for himself to glorify his name. So we shouldn't be trying to do that ourselves. Instead, that's kind of usurping God's authority. Our enemies may persecute us. They may do terrible things to us. But it's not our job to avenge ourselves because God has claimed that, and He is our rock, and we just need to trust in Him to do all that for us.
And so at this point, Moses finishes up his song with God basically showing his strength and defeating his enemies powerfully and saving his people. And the very last verse in this song says, "Rejoice, O nations," or O Goyim, O Gentiles, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants and will render vengeance on his adversaries and will atone for his land and his people. Paul actually quotes this verse about rejoice, O Goyim, with his people. He quotes that in the book of Romans, talking about how Jew and Gentile alike are God's people and they all can serve him. But this speaks to the concept of how when God vindicates his people Israel, that will be a light for all the nations, for all the Goyim to know God. And then they can rejoice with his people Israel. And in fact, they can become his people. All of this reminds me of something that we read in the prophet Zechariah, where he prophesies against the nations which plunder you, Israel, for he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. Sing for joy and be glad, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I am coming and I will dwell in your midst, declares Adonai. Many nations, many Goyim, many Gentiles will join themselves to Adonai in that day and will become my people. Then I will dwell in your midst, in Israel's midst, and you will know that Adonai Tzivaot, the Lord of hosts, has sent me to you. Adonai will possess Judah as his portion in the Holy Land and will again choose Jerusalem. So God is saying that when he comes to rescue his people, the daughter of Zion, and when he defends them against the people who have touched the apple of his eye, who have touched Jerusalem, who have touched Israel, is at that point that many nations and many Gentiles will come and attach themselves to God and become his people. Like we already said, Israel is God's portion and inheritance on the earth. But at the same time, God is also going to bring other people to himself, and they will be his people as well. This also ties into what we read about how Gentiles are provoking Israel to jealousy because he's bringing them in as his people. And so when God saves his people Israel, they will all be serving him along with the Gentile believers that God used to provoke his people to jealousy. And then the Gentiles will be rejoicing with his people Israel, and they will be his people, and they will all be attached to God, and they will all serve him and know him. And going back again to the Song of Moses, it ends with, he will atone for his land and his people. And that is definitely speaking about the Messiah who atoned for his people, who offered himself as a sin offering. He bore their sins such that they can be set free. And so when the Jewish people are atoned for and they're brought into the new covenant that we talked about so many times, it's at that point that God will be glorified the most that he's ever been glorified in all of human history, and all the nations will see God and know him for who he is, and his power will go out to the ends of the earth.
Yeah, again, going back to the beginning of what we said, this song is a witness for the people of Israel. And we see now, going through the whole thing, that it's a witness declaring God's whole salvation plan for the world. It begins with God choosing Israel and taking them to be his people, and then Israel rejecting him so that no one knows who God is. They're all following the foreign gods. But by provoking Israel with the nations, God will then make Israel jealous and bring them back to himself. And when he does that, when he saves his people, he will glorify his name among all the nations. He will take vengeance on his enemies, and all the nations will know who he is. And so the culmination of this witness really is, see now that I, even I, am he. This is speaking directly to the people of Israel. So as long as they remember this song, God is declaring to them, I am he, there is no God besides me. I am giving salvation. I will do it through my people Israel. I will do it through all the nations for my people Israel, and I will do it through Israel for all the nations. And the peoples, along with my people Israel, will all be my people, and they will all rejoice in the presence of God who saves them and cleanses them and atones for their sins.
All of this just really reminds me of the end of Romans 11, where Paul says, "Indeed, as you Goyim once did not believe in God, and now find loving kindness by the unbelief of these Yehudim, of these Jews, so also these Yehudim now do not believe, so that in the loving kindness given to you, the Gentiles, they may also now find loving kindness. For God shut up together the whole world to unbelief, so that to the whole world he might do loving kindness." That is basically God's salvation plan in a nutshell. He called the people of Israel, but then they stumbled, and so God brought in the Gentiles to provoke his people to jealousy. And so once Israel is provoked to jealousy, then Israel will broadcast God's salvation to the ends of the earth.
And it's not like Paul was saying something new, because as we see, Moses wrote it all down as a witness for heaven and earth and all the people of Israel throughout their generations to see God's salvation plan right here.
And so this then leads Paul to just declare God's greatness and say, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and untraceable his ways. For who has known the mind of Adonai, or who became his counselor, or who gave first to him that it should be given back to him? Because from him and through him and to him are all the things. To him is the glory to the ages. Amen."
And so I think the big takeaway from this portion is trust in the judgment of the rock of salvation. God is the one who chose Israel and built them up and established them and made them into a people, into his people. And as long as they rely on him, he gives them everything they need. But when they turned from him and rejected him, then they don't have any rock to stand on. They reject the rock of their salvation, and so they lose salvation. They just end up being defeated and destroyed and harassed. And yet we see that even the nations into whose hand God gave up the people of Israel to be defeated, yet those people were equally helpless without God. And when God brings his vengeance and he declares his judgment, then he destroys. And so those who don't trust in him have no hope. Now, as the prophet Isaiah said, and Paul later quoted, God has set in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and he who is believing thereon will not be ashamed. That rock is Yeshua. God has given all of us a rock, which if we believe on, can be the rock of our salvation. And it is him, it is God, it is Yeshua. And so as God promised to vindicate his people, to defeat his adversaries and prove that he is God and there is no other beside him, we need to believe in him. And if we believe in him, we will not be moved, we will not be ashamed, because he will be our foundation, he will make us secure, he will defeat our enemies, and we will be saved.
That wraps up the portion of Ha'azinu. Next time we'll be looking at the portion of Vizot HaBaracha on Simchat Torah. So be sure to tune in for that. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to keep updated on new videos. And if you would, please consider sending us a donation to help us make more videos. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. God bless.